Did you know that a couple of years ago, researchers from Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association released the following stats? They did a long study, and the authors affirmed that while the vast majority of cases of Alzheimer's are found in Americans over the age of 65, between 2013 and 2017, they found a 143% increase in diagnoses for those between 55 and 64, a 311% increase in diagnoses of Alzheimer's for those between 45 and 54, and a 373% increase in diagnoses for those between 30 and 44. So listen up. You need to know what you can do to stave off Alzheimer's. And my next guest, a medical doctor, says you can. He's been on the show before. His name is Dr. Dale Bredesen. I respect him immensely. And he's back with a new book called The Ageless Brain: How to Sharpen and Protect Your Mind for a Lifetime. Dale, welcome back to the show. Wonderful to see you. Those stats are really alarming. So is it actually a growing problem, or we're just getting better at diagnosing?
It's a growing problem. When I was training many years ago, we never saw people in their 40s, 50s. This was a disease of late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Now, one of the most common things we see is people who are in their 40s or 50s who are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So yes, we're getting a little better at diagnosing it for sure. There are new blood tests, et cetera, but there's no question it is on the increase in these young groups.
Okay, we've talked before about some of the preventative measures, and I want to go back over some of them now, but I'm going to lead with the most controversial, but maybe promising. You tell me, can Ozempic help stave off Alzheimer's and dementia?
It is possible. That's one of the many things, we're hearing from RFK about all these different things. One of the issues is, what are we doing about metabolism? We do not have an optimal, as you know, we do not have an optimal metabolism in most people in this country. Too much high-carb food, too much ultra-processed food, and a lot of damage, frankly, to our metabolic systems. And so this is one of the possibilities. And there are other things as well. There are things you can do to avoid that. But improving your insulin sensitivity, of course, what Ozempic will do will increase your endogenous insulin as well. The problem, of course, is that there are some side effects, and we don't yet know the long-term effects of using GLP-1s.
What effect on Alzheimer's do statins have? Because I've been hearing all sorts of info about they're good, no, they're bad.
Yeah, it's a great point because they're both. That's the problem. So they have one effect, which is to reduce the overall inflammation. And as I pointed out in the book, and which, as you know, this book is really about saving synapses for all of us. In the U.S., whether you live to 80, 90, 100, 110, of course, people are trying to push that up far to 140, 160, whatever it is. Your lifespan, unfortunately, is not met often by your brain span. So you get to 40 or 50 or 60 and things just collapse, as you know. And so as you indicated, more young people having a problem. So this is a time in which you've got to look at what are these different drivers and what'll happen with the statins, yes, you lower the inflammation, which, by the way, you can do with other things. You don't need statins to do that. But you also lower the support for the brain. You lower the cholesterol. And to be fair, you make some in the brain as well. But if you use a statin, if you have to do that, and we recommend you do other things first, there are things like Zetia and bergamot and just changing your diet and exercise, a lot of things you can do before you ever need statins. And there are also things beyond. PCSK9 inhibitors can be even better than this. But if you're going to use a statin, use one that would be called a hydrophilic statin. That would be like a Crestor, instead of one that is a hydrophobic statin, which would be like a Lipitor.
Let's go through again. The book is called The Ageless Brain by Dr. Dale Bredesen, who I completely respect and support. The diet, exercise, supplements, and toxins, I think are like the big categories. I've heard you say dairy is not great. Now, dairy, you're saying Greek yogurt every day is not good for preventing Alzheimer's? Because it's so good for doing so many other things for you.
Yeah, it's a great point. And for some people, it'll be okay. But here's the problem. When you any sort of dairy can produce some degree of inflammation. So if you've got someone who already has some degree of cognitive decline, or if you're trying to optimize your brain span, then you want to take that into account. You want to get rid of grains, which can damage your lining of your gut. You want to get rid of dairy. And it's not to say you can't slowly reintroduce it in the future, but you have to remember, when you see someone who's beginning to have some cognitive decline, only one of two things will happen. Either you will help them to improve, and we've published that many times, or they will die. They will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease and pass away. So we want to do everything possible. We want to pull out all the stops to get the optimal reversal of cognitive decline. And we were the first to publish that back in 2014. And so we want to do everything possible. That includes getting rid of some grains, that includes getting rid of dairy, and it includes getting rid of simple carbs. And then you want to have a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. You want to have appropriate exercise, as you said, and just go right down the list. Managing stress, optimizing sleep. These are things that people aren't doing. When I ask people, how much did you sleep last night? What did your wearable show for your sleep? They don't know. So you want to have at least 7 hours of sleep at night. You want to have at least an hour and a half of REM each night. You want to have at least 1 hour of deep sleep each night. And you want to have an oxygen concentration, saturation in your blood of at least 94% while you're sleeping. So many people don't have that. So this is why the brain span in America does not equal the lifespan in America. And that's something that clearly can be improved.
By the way, folks, this can all show up. I have an Oura Ring on here. They're not paying me. I paid for this. But all that information Dale just mentioned comes to me every morning on this Oura Ring. You can get a Fitbit. You can get an Apple Watch. But all that stuff is very easy to get your arms around to find. On exercise, it's a certain kind of exercise. Is it not? Like, I've been told that the best aerobic exercise for somebody trying to stave off Alzheimer's includes, at least a couple times a week, interval training.
It's a great point. So there's so much now for all of these things that we know that we didn't know even just a few years ago. So as you said, this high intensity interval training has turned out to be the one that seems to be the most effective at reducing your risk for cognitive decline. But then beyond that, there are things like Katsu bands. These are restriction bands that you can put on your arms and your legs. And what they do is they actually give you more bang for your buck. Because what happens, Megyn, is you get different mechanisms. So when you do strength training, you are improving your insulin sensitivity, which is critical for your brain and critical for preventing cognitive decline of Alzheimer's disease. On the other hand, when you do the aerobic training, you are improving blood flow and oxygenation. This is one of the reasons something called EWAT is so helpful, which is exercise with oxygen therapy. EWAT gives you better blood flow and better oxygenation at the same time. So many people find this very helpful. So there's a lot of new understanding about what works the best and what are things that are available to get best outcomes in that area.
This is all in the book. You can learn more about that oxygen therapy. It sounds kind of fun to be on the treadmill with your little mask on. I'll do it if it'll help my brain. We can kind of get younger on the inside when it comes to our health and our likely longevity and the wellness that we can expect of ourselves as we age. So explain that.
That's right. It's not just about more years to your life. It's more life in your years. And the key is to understand that for the first time, we have the ability to measure our biological age, which we never had before. So we can see, based on what we're doing, our lifestyle, our habits, whatever we're doing, how that affects our biological age. And the truth is, most of us have come to expect disease, frailty, disability, dysfunction, and decrepitude as sort of the normal consequences of getting older, but they're not. It turns out the science is very clear that they're actually dysfunctions that are a disease process that can be treated, reversed. And that's the whole point of my book, Young Forever, is to unlock this new science of longevity and teach people how, with very simple, affordable practices, they can reverse their biological clock, even as they get chronologically older.
All right. And I want to tell people, I should have mentioned this up top. You went to Cornell undergrad. You went to the University of Ottawa, faculty of medicine there. You're a practicing family physician. You're MD, 14-time New York Times bestseller, and also the head of strategy and innovation at the Cleveland Clinic. Center for Functional Medicine. That's what we're talking about, functional medicine. That's what your specialty
Absolutely.
is. So
Yes.
you know of what you speak. Decrepitude is a hilarious word for the aging process.
Yeah, it kind of gets the point home, you know? I mean,
It
just
really
you look
does.
around and you go, well, nobody wants to be 100 years old, because by the time you get to be 100, you're like, barely can get out. Maybe you're in a
Yes.
nursing home, you're frail. I saw a guy on a horse who was 100 years old riding around in Costa Rica. That's impressive, because he's one of the blue zones where they naturally incorporate the habits of how to live a long time just by default. I mean, we need to learn from them. And we need to incorporate some of the more incredible advances in longevity science, but we can actually reverse our biological clock and stay vital and fit as we get older. And I know at 63, I'm way more fit and stronger and capable than I was when I was 30. And it's really remarkable to see how by applying this longevity science, we can literally turn back our clocks and add a lot of value to our lives, because most of us walk around feeling like crap. We're tired, we're sluggish, we can't sleep great, we have digestive issues, joint pains, maybe headaches, congestion, who knows what. And I call it FLC syndrome. That's when you feel like crap. And we come to expect that as normal. Oh, well, I used to be able to do this, but I can't do that. Nonsense. We actually know, if we know how to regulate our biology, how to turn back the clock and use the advances in longevity science to heal what we call the hallmarks of aging. We can talk about that, but it's basically all this shit that goes wrong. Can I say that on radio?
Yeah,
all this shit that goes wrong that actually is not a normal part of aging. It's an abnormal aging. And we all are going to get older. We're all going to get, progressively older, but we don't have to be in that category, people who end up with the last 20% of their lives in poor health. We can feel good up until the end and then go. Like, I've seen many people would live to 100 and then they just kind of go to bed and that's it. That's kind of how we should go.
Yes, that's what we all want. That's the dream. We're going to get to the blue zones too in a minute, but let's just start with and a couple of things that you said. How do we check? So, because there is a thing you can check. You said in the book, either a blood test or maybe even a saliva test.
Yeah.
So, and that anyone can get to figure out how old you are right now on the inside.
That's right. I mean, we have this amazing ability to reprogram our genes. People don't realize that, but we can actually measure the rate at which our genes are aging in a sense. There's this program called the epigenetic program, which is regulating how our genes are expressed or regulated. And so our genes aren't fixed. We can't change those, but the way they're expressed is influenced by what we eat and exercise, how we think, environmental toxins, our nutritional status, our microbiome. All these things wash over our genes and regulate the epigenome, which is modifiable. So the keyboards on a piano are 88 keys. You can't change that. Same thing with your genes. You got 20,000 genes. You can't change that. But the piano player can play classical, ragtime, jazz, rock, reggae, whatever. And that is the epigenome. The epigenome can be changed. And so the new tests are measuring the rate of your biological aging through your epigenetic marks on your genes. And that changes over time. In one study, they reversed the biological age of the participants by eating a healthy diet and some simple lifestyle practices using a functional medicine framework. In 8 weeks, they reversed their biological age by 3 years using this diagnostic metric.
Now, how is this telomeres? Is this what they're
No, it's not telomeres. It's called DNA
different?
methylation. It's basically telomeres also are measured, and that's another way of looking at your rate of aging. There are many other ways, but this is a really important way because it's really powerful to see what's happening to the epigenome, which is a regulator of aging. And so it's measuring what we call DNA methylation. It's basically little marks on your DNA with a carbon and 3 hydrogens that it is a signal to turn on or off this gene or regulate this pathway. And that's exactly what we can influence by what we eat, by how we exercise, by our thoughts and belief systems, by our social connections, by reducing our exposure to toxins. All these things help to optimize our epigenome.
So do you go to the doctor, your primary care physician, and say, I want to check my epigenome, or how do you test for this?
You could. They might look at you cross-eyed because it takes about 20 years for scientific advances to end up in the clinic. But you can go online, literally, and order a home test. And there's a number of labs out there. I don't have any affiliation with them, but one is called True Diagnostic that provides a whole comprehensive set of age-related tests and diagnostics. There's other labs that do it, and I think there's an emerging science. So we're constantly refining and improving the diagnostics. But it's something you can do. It's not terribly expensive. It's probably between $200 to $500 for the testing. And then you can see, oh, where am I at? And if you're like 60 and it shows up 40, awesome. If you're 60 and it shows up 70, it's time to get to work.
Keep reading. Keep reading. Wait, and just to be perfectly clear, so for the audience, what should they Google to find these tests? Should they Google epigenome and then the name of that lab?
Yeah, they can go DNA methylation testing. One of the labs is Truth Diagnostic that I use, but there's others. Yeah, DNA methylation, epigenetic testing. I don't know. You'll find it.
All right, so if you could reduce it if you could reduce your age, your biological age by 3 years and 8 weeks, does that mean in 2 years of living well?
To zero?
Yeah. Like how, I mean, could I be like sweet 16 again? How low could it become?
That's a great question. I don't know. We don't know. We haven't tested and figured it out yet. I think it's very reasonable to expect you can get a 10 or 20-year reversal. If you're older, if you're 20, you're not going to get a 20-year reversal, but you can actually start to see these metrics change. And we're learning all the time about how far we can go. I'm curious if I can get to 25. I'm applying all these new strategies that I wrote about in my book, Young Forever, about how to reverse my biological age. I'm 63, but biologically 43. But I've been living a healthy lifestyle most of my life. So even though I've had some health issues, I've been able to actually keep my body working pretty well. So I think I don't know is the answer to the question, but I think we'll find out soon enough. And I think what's even more kind of sci-fi I talk about in the book is new discoveries that allow us to reprogram our genes and our cells to a younger you. So maybe there's at some point in 10, 15 years where you'll be able to take some factor externally that will reactivate or turn on these transcription factors called Yamanaka factors that have been implanted in you externally, and they can actually reverse your genes. So if let's say you're 50 and you have arthritis, your skin's a little wrinkled, your hair's a little gray, you're getting metabolism's bad, your muscles are kind of wasting, you can turn on this switch and turn back the clock to 25. Now, that's kind of happening in animal studies right now. It's not in human studies, but it's really wild. Like, for example, they're taking blind mice and actually programming their cells to a younger version that actually regains their sight. So that kind of is mind-blowing, but that's not available right now. But it's kind of talks about the potential we have to literally turn on these ancient healing systems in our body. See, that's the whole thing, Megyn, that's so remarkable about the science. For so many years, we've been treating disease and we're going down the wrong path. We need to be discovering what creates health.
Why do so many people have such food issues? I was talking to my team about this recently because if you read the Daily Mail, which I love, every other day they will have somebody who used to be a bikini model whose name we know from the 80s or 90s or what have you, who is now morbidly obese. And of course they get this poor soul walking down the street just trying to get their groceries at age 70. But there's always a huge juxtaposition between like this bone thin, like too thin, to be honest, bikini model, and then this morbidly obese older version of them. And I always believe, Jillian, those two people are struggling with the same issue.
Flip sides of the same coin. You're absolutely right, actually. Look, you have the person that has the dad bod, right? The guy that had 2 kids and then the desk job, and all of a sudden you can't drink beers with your buddies on Saturday without it packing on slowly over the years. You have a midlife crisis, you take off 25 pounds. It's a great thing. Then you have the individual, or the mom that had 2 kids and has a job, and she's like, oh, you know what? I somehow have managed to put on 15 pounds over the past decade. Let me take that off. Fine. With that said, you now have the individual that is, let's say, 50 pounds overweight, 75, 100 plus. This is a very different beast. This is not a person that likes pizza. This is not a person that's lazy. This is not a person that's lifestyle has caught up to them. This is an individual that is using food because it is providing them with something so significant that at one time in their lives or another, I'm willing to bet you, it meant their psychological survival. We use it in so many ways, whether it's control, like you don't control me, I control my body, or a defense structure of an individual who may have been incested or molested. And it's like, if I desexualize myself, am I protecting myself? I'm just giving you
those things are related. A lot of people who wind up with eating disorders say that they were molested or sexually assaulted
all the time. Yep. Or, there was a young boy I worked with whose Mother was also morbidly obese, young, 18 young. And we took 100 pounds off of him. He goes back home to his environment and within the first week puts 7 pounds on because his mom sees him and immediately feels like he's going to outgrow her, emotionally withdraws from him. So what does the weight provide? An emotional connection with his mother. And I could go on and on and on. But the reality is that this is a very complex issue. It's not black and white. It's not healthy at any size. It's not about fat shaming. It's none of the above, but it is rooted firmly in mental health that plays out in your physical health.
You mentioned control. So I have a couple of friends, 2 of my dear, dear friends had, I mean, their daughters are still around, but they've aged up now, but had daughters at the age of like 14, 15, develop an eating disorder. And in both cases, it started with extreme veganism. And so I think there are signs on these things, right? When it comes to control, it's like, it's not about being a vegan. It's not about saving animals. It's about that extreme control, which is like red flag all over it.
It's a very difficult position to be in as a parent. And the tremendous irony of this is that my daughter struggles with food addiction, meaning not bulimia, not anorexia, but food obsessed, could eat and eat and eat to the point that, you know, as her mother, I think to myself, okay, she is adopted. So there's that component of feeding this pit inside from the first 2 years of her life, which she can share when she's older, but were without question extraordinarily traumatic. And then you've got me as her mom. So you have to wonder if there's an element of rebellion in the teenage years. What I would tell any friend going through this, right? I'd be like, listen, role model wellness, you know, be supportive in every way you can. Don't make an issue of their weight or their health ever at all, or they will interpret it as you don't love them. And you keep the child active and be active with them. I did all of that with my daughter and none of it worked.
Of course.
And we finally got to the point where I was like, baby, you know, she would go into town, get bags of candy. She's fit. She pulls it off. Yep. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the fact that this is so bad for her developing body. I get bags of Halloween candy and I was like, honey, listen to me. As your mother, I'm dying inside and I feel like I'm failing you and I need to do something. But on the same hand, I don't want you to think like, you don't love me. You're trying to control me. You want to change me. And I finally was like, what do you need from me? You're just going to have to tell me what you need me to do right now. Do you need me to leave you alone? Like, would you need me to help? And she actually finally was like, I want you to help me.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, but if I do, I swear to God, don't come back and tell me I didn't love you the way you were.
And don't tell your therapist.
She started laughing. So we've been going to the gym together. We're running sprints together. But as a parent, it's very muddy. From the outside, you know, looking in, you can give tremendous advice. But from the inside, you can't see the forest through the trees and you're not quite sure where to intervene or how to intervene or if you're going to mess them up by intervening.
Yeah. We've been just like honest with our kids. I mean, I'm slim. My husband's thin. I mean, he's muscular, but he's a trim guy. And our approach has just been to be honest. You know, you don't want to be too heavy. That's not healthy. And you don't want to be too thin. That's not healthy either.
Right.
And we'll tell you if you're getting one way or the other.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll ask, we'll be like, absolutely not, you're good. Our kids are thin, you know, they eat like we eat, so they're not really gonna, and they have those fast metabolism, so they don't have to worry about their snacks yet.
Lucky.
But
my
so
son's
far
like
that's
that.
been okay. You know, like it's the daughters that you really have to worry about it in there. And men do get eating disorders, but usually it's the daughters. And I do already see, she's only 12, and I do already see this athletic, beautiful girl being like, why are my legs fat? I'm like, that's where we carry our fat, honey. Like, that's where we, like, look, mom's got it too. Like, it's just society starts planting this stuff.
Wow. That she's interpreting her legs as being fat.
That's where we are. And she's, of course, a thin girl, but like, that's America. Like, fat on one's body is like, assessed as, is that a negative? Can we have fat on our bodies?
This is why we shouldn't be looking at it from a literal perspective of, okay, you appear this way. This is something that belongs literally in a doctor's office. They will tell you, hey, your cholesterol's high, your blood pressure's high, your XYZ PDQ, the biomarkers are off. There's cause for concern. And this is when you have concern. And a pediatrician will tell you, they said to me, they're like, her blood pressure's high, she's 12. And I was like, okay, this is, you know.
Time to intervene.
They did. And that's when I was like, honey, because it has nothing to do with the way she looks.
Yeah.
You'd see her and be like, wow. And I'd be like, I know, she gets away with murder. You have no idea.
And
You
plus,
know?
you're setting them up. Like, that's the real concern is like, of course, they're not. Like, you're setting them up for a lifetime once they're.
No idea.
Right? Like,
I cannot even tell you. All I do all day long is talk to some of the world's best doctors, and they will tell you if a child is not consuming vegetables between the ages of 13 and 17, their chances of breast cancer, a girl, obviously, child in this case, is 50% higher in their 50s.
Oh, God.
It has to do with microbiome and the role it plays with immunity. But and then I'm like, oh my God, honey, please, like
Right?
one,
Have a salad.
you're gonna blink your eyes.
For the love of God.
Yes, yeah, it's crazy when you know too much. It starts to get even scarier.
Well, that's same in my business, but it comes to like sharks and
Yes.
lightning strikes and all sorts of stuff. And my kids are like, what? I mean, my 13-year-old went on a school camping trip recently. It was like his entire grade, and they went to this lovely sort of camp in the woods where they had cabins and all that. And all the other mothers are like, have a great time, sweetheart, love you. And I was like, watch out for the molesters. Poor Yates was like, wow, Mom. One of the things I've heard you say is that sleep is your superpower. And you gave an example of, and I think everyone can relate to this, that sleep is like clicking the save button on the things that you've learned that day, which is why it's so important to do after you're studying or after you're learning. But it also can prime your brain for learning. So, I mean, it's important in both stages, but I think everybody who's gone through school, college, whatever, law school, understands if you manage to get that 8 hours in after you've done your cramming or your reading, you know it's so much better the next morning versus having to pull an all-nighter.
And that evidence is now so powerful and so well replicated that when it comes to your learning and memory abilities, sleep is actually critical in three unique ways. First, we need sleep before learning to get your brain ready to initially lay down those new memories. In other words, sleep almost prepares your brain like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up those new pieces of information. And without sleep, the memory circuits of the brain effectively become waterlogged and you can't absorb new memories. And we did a study, for example, where we asked, is pulling the all-nighter a wise idea? And first, what we found was that the memory centers in the brain were shut down by a lack of sleep. And they were just bouncing that information, almost like a full inbox in your email. The second thing that we learned, however, was that you not only need sleep before learning to get those memories into the brain initially, just as you said, you then need sleep after learning to cement and solidify those new memories into the brain. And in fact, during sleep, it's a very active process, by the way. We transfer memories from that short-term vulnerable reservoir to a more permanent long-term storage site. And that's the process of saving them, as you said, almost like hitting the save button on those memories. But then more recently, we've discovered that sleep is much more intelligent than we ever imagined possible. That sleep not only saves individual pieces of memories, but sleep will intelligently start to associate and integrate that new information together. And it's, I liken it to informational alchemy. It's that you wake up the next morning and you have a revised mind-wide web of associations.
Definitely.
And that's the reason that, I'm sure you've probably experienced this and people listening may have, that you can come up with solutions to previously impenetrable problems. And I think it's the reason that no one has probably ever told you, Megyn, that you should stay awake on a problem. They don't. Instead, they tell you to sleep on a problem. And that's exactly what the evidence is telling us.
Now, this may be outside of your area of expertise, but when you say that it can actually sleep can help move the memory to a more long-term storage part of your brain, do you know whether that place has got all the memories in it, that all the memories are potentially accessible? If only the hardware would work the way we wish it would?
It's a very challenging question in memory science, and I do a lot of work in this area. how much information is actually stored in the human brain and how much capacity do we have for storage of information? We don't have the answer yet, but I think what we've learned is a surprising fact that we probably have a lot more information stored in our brain than we ourselves are consciously aware of. And you gave a lovely analogy, and I think it's absolutely correct. There are some times when someone asks you a question, you say, I can't remember. It's gone. And then all of a sudden you get a little bit of a cue that you look at something, a label on a bottle, and all of a sudden it unlocks the memory and it comes flooding back. And what that tells us is something fundamental, that the information was in your brain, it was available, but it wasn't accessible. And sometimes we make the mistake that a lack of accessibility reflects the fact that the memory is not there. That's perhaps not true. The memory is there. It's available. It's just not accessible. It's almost as though sometimes we lose the IP address to that memory and we can't go and find it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there was a lovely study done several years ago that demonstrated once again a role for sleep here, that sleep increases the veracity of which you can locate and identify and access those memories. So you could have that information stored within the brain, but you just can't recall it during the exam if you haven't had enough sleep.
Wow. I mean, I feel like everyone's had that experience, and you know it's in there. You just have to get the keys somehow, close your eyes, get better rested, don't drink. There are all sorts of things you can do, but it's fascinating. And I love those stories where you hear about somebody who gets hit on the head and then they go in for the operation or something, whatever, and suddenly they can play piano again, which they hadn't been able to do since they were 4. Unlocking the mystery of our brains is fun science. I'm inspired because this is what you tweeted out recently. The good news, we have a drug that is very effective at delaying the onset of death and preserving health span. Yes. And then it goes on. This drug is called exercise, and nothing else rivals it. And you go on from there. But this seems like rule number 1, exercise.
Yeah. I'm not convinced there's any intervention that can delay death as long as exercise. So when you're talking about the lifespan side of that ledger of longevity, I could think of some exceptions, right? If you took somebody that has familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a genetic condition that gives you cholesterol through the roof, that's probably someone for whom getting them on lipid lowering therapy in their 20s will have a bigger effect on the length of their life over the next 80 years. But, I'd have to start thinking of those types of examples to come up with a scenario under which there's an intervention that is more powerful than exercise to lengthen your life.
Wow.
Now, consider something more important, which is even if exercise didn't lengthen your life one day, I would still argue it is the single most important thing to do because of its effects on health span. And remember what we said earlier. At the end of the day, more people care about how well they live than how long they live. Mm-hmm. The difference between 80 and 85 and 90 isn't nearly as important as what you were able to do during that last decade. And the impact that exercise has on both your cognition and your physical body, obviously, is enormous. In fact, I don't think there's an intervention that has a greater impact on your brain than exercise. Again, there are extreme examples that can violate that. You're going to talk to Matt Walker, and he'll explain to you that if someone has really, really horrible sleep, it's going to compromise their cognition. And absolutely that's true. And it's going to increase their risk of dementia. But when you go outside of sort of the pathological, I think exercise is really hands down the most important drug we have to preserve our body and to preserve our mind.
Wow. Okay. So the next question on everyone's mind is what kind? Do I do the pounding HIIT class where I have to do tons of intensive cardio, or do I go to the gym and lift weights, or do I do Pilates? What kind?
So again, if you're sort of arguing this from the standpoint that I would argue it, which is through total longevity, which means how do you extend life and how do you enjoy life better? It's going to be a bit of all of the above in the sense of it's really about strength, stability, aerobic efficiency, and anaerobic power. Those are really the four components that we break exercise down into. And each of those must be trained for with a very deliberate sense of what you're doing. You know, I think that the biggest challenge with exercise is that most people are kind of rudderless. You know, you sort of know it's important. You kind of know I should be doing this thing, but there's very little specificity around what they're doing. And I believe that if you're going to really train to be kind of a kick-ass person in the last decade of their life, you need to train with the specificity of an athlete. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be training like you're a football player, but if you think that Tom Brady isn't very specific in what he does to prepare for what he did for the last, 22 years, that's crazy, right? If you pick any athlete at the top of their game, nothing they're doing is not deliberate. And we have to be the same way if we're trying to be incredible 90-year-olds.
Right.
And our training has to be predicated on those four fundamental pieces.
So how would that look? I know you've got a amazing regimen that you do, but for the rest of us average humans, how could that work realistically for, the busy people listening to the show or watching it? Like, what's realistic? What would you say to kick it off?
I mean, I always start, I start with, I put the question to a patient the other way. I would say, what do you want to be able to do in the marginal decade of your life? I call the marginal decade of your life the last decade of your life. So we're all going to die. Therefore, we will all have a last decade of life. You don't know when you enter the marginal decade, but you know when you're there, right? Most people kind of know when they're in that last decade of your life, but it's not entirely clear the minute you enter it. But nevertheless, we can get a sense of who we're going to be in that last decade. And I ask people to tell me what they want to be able to do. And I have to do it in great specificity, right? So I don't want to hear, I just want to be able to, move around pain-free and play with my grandkids. It's like, no. It's got to be much more granular than that. Like, I want to know exactly how you want to play with your grandkids. I want to know exactly where you want to be hiking. I want to know exactly how many steps you want to be able to walk up, exactly how many pounds you want to be able to carry, that kind of stuff. Once you have that roadmap, and we use this model, we call this the centenarian decathlon, right? So, what do you want to be able to do? What are the 10 things that you want to be able to do physically at the end of your life in that last decade? You then work backwards from there. And you say, well, first of all, doing those things implies that you can do this. So, for example, to be able to climb so many stairs with, X pounds of groceries implies you have a VO2 max of this. And if you have a VO2 max of that when you're 85, how high does it need to be when you're 75 and when you're 65 and when you're 55 and when you're 45? Because all of the things that you want to be able to do, you're going to get worse at as you get there, obviously. So you have to be able to start from a high enough position where you are currently, so that by the time the glider gets down to that last decade, you're able to still meet your objectives.
So there's no question you're going to be deteriorating. You just want to make sure that you get your base up high enough that the deterioration still lands you in a good place.
Exactly. And I want people to go through that process, which is called backcasting. So in other words, don't sit here where you are today and try to forecast where you want to be. Go to the end of the line and backcast to where you are now. Because most people are going to be in for a rude awakening.
Well, I was just going to ask, how late is too late to begin this?
It's never too late, Megyn, but it's, it's like saving for retirement. Okay. If a 60-year-old decides that they want to save for financial freedom, they're going to have a harder time doing it than a 40-year-old. And it's the same here, right? If a person is 60 and they've never exercised a day in their life, it's not too late to start. But I'd be lying to them if I said that they're not going to have a much harder time achieving ambitious goals than someone who starts at 40.
Yeah, you're not going to land in the same place as that other person unless you just go to an extreme level. I got it. Talk to me about the walking, and can we zero in on the sprinting? I was glad when I reviewed your talking points to see that I only have to sprint once every 7 to 10 days. But I don't to this moment, really know how to do it, how much of it to do, what it looks like. I like the walking, but just walk us through that exercise, the exercise plan that you recommend.
Yeah. So, when I created the Primal Blueprint 20 years ago, I looked at ancestral patterns that created strong, lean, fit humans. And there's a lot of walking. So humans we're bipedal. We're born to walk. That was the title of my book, Born to Walk. So we're born to be able to run, but we're not born to run metronomically, again, day in and day out. We're born to walk a lot, like many times a day. We're upright. It's the single greatest thing you could do. It's the quintessential human movement is walking. But sprinting, if you look at what our ancestors did, once in a while, they got chased by some, beast, or they had to chase after some beast. And so sprinting is part of the expectation of the genetic recipe that we all have that wants us to be strong. And so this requirement, this expectation that our recipe has for us to go out and do something really, really high intensity for a short burst of time, not every day, but once in a while. And we've settled upon, like, if once a week you can have a sprint day. And what does that look like? It doesn't mean you have to run sprints at the track. It means you could do sprints on an elliptical trainer. You could do them on a bike. You could do them on an assault bike. There's lots of ways that you can find
Treadmill
to go all out as hard as you can for, let's say, 20 seconds or 30 seconds, then take a short rest, minute and a half, 2-minute rest, do it again for 20 or 30 seconds, short rest. And I would say 6 of them is a good number, 6 work sets. This becomes, I did it yesterday. I did 10 sprints in 20 minutes, and each sprint was like 70 yards, 80 yards. In 20 minutes, I was done. I was what they call truly knackered. I mean, I was tired to the point that I didn't feel like I needed to do anything else for the rest of the day. And I was sort of satisfied in my mind that, okay, I've done that. I don't have to do that again for another week. And it's short enough and sweet enough that it's not grueling. It's not grinding. It's not like you're having to overcome discomfort for long periods of time. I think anybody can go 20 seconds or 30 seconds really hard, then take a break and do it again. So now, if you want to go to the track, Megyn, and learn how to sprint, we can arrange that. And it's probably the most, truly effective, again, quintessential human movement is to actually sprint running, but you can do it with other modalities.
And here's the great news about that. There's no better way of getting a firm bottom than sprinting. That's the thing. If you want a tight ass, sprint.
100%.
It's better than squats. It's better than lunges. It's better than everything. Just sprint, but you probably have to do it a little bit more than once a week. So this is like
but you know what's funny is
sprinting.
You're right. You're 100% right. And I would say sprinting as an adjunct is, in addition to a day of squats and a day of lunges, or have a leg day in there. I'm saying, like, my minimum effective dose of exercise would be walk, lots of low level activity throughout the week. Twice a week, go to the gym and lift weights, maybe upper body, maybe full body. One of those days, make it a leg day, and then one day go do sprints. And you will get to 85 to 90% of your genetic potential fitness. Also, provided you get the diet dialed in, because 85% of your body composition is determined by how you eat. How your body burns off its own stored body fat. But that's the metric. That's the minimum effective dose. And for building a booty, absolutely, that sprinting is it's key. But I'm not saying don't do lunges, don't do squats as well. It's one day a week.
I know. I'm saying it. I'm just saying, if you look at the bodies of the sprinters at the Olympics versus the bodies of the marathon runners, you see the difference. The sprinters have the amazing round, hard bottoms, and the marathon runners are teeny tiny, skinny with no bottom, which is not exactly what you want. Okay, Doc, I want to get a viewer question into you. Here is, Olga G asks, she's concerned about microplastics that seem to be everywhere. How do you support your body and possibly detox those? And this is related to what Leonardo S. asked, which is, what's the best way to detox your whole body? A lot of people worried about those microplastics, which is like, even if your house has as little of that as possible, you're breathing it. You're breathing it in the air at this point. You're drinking it. So what's the best way?
I think that detoxing microplastics starts with limiting your intake. We don't really know the best way that the human body can get rid of these. there's some speculation they can happen in the sauna. I don't really buy it. They're just not that size of particle. And it's important that people understand.
Detoxing.
Yeah. Well, detoxing microplastics, potentially heavy metals in the sauna or other volatile compounds, which can be in the sweat. But microplastics in the sauna, I'm skeptical. I think that you got to start with just not intaking them. And I think that people don't understand where we're getting these from. And that's the big problem. Yes, you could imagine that if you're drinking out of a plastic bottle, that's going to have microplastics. But like you said, Megyn, I was really surprised when I realized this. And that's why I've talked about it so much, that the paper coffee cups we get from any coffee store are lined with plastic. Yes. And anytime you're putting boiling water into plastic, it is just exploding microplastics. And let's just talk numbers, right? So there was a study done at Columbia University, and they're using a special type of microscopy, which is really the gold standard for assaying microplastics and nanoplastics. And the distinction is made based on the size of the plastic particle. If you're less than 1 micrometer, if you're in the nanometer range, you're talking about nanoplastics. And I think this is the major issue that most people are not talking about. So Columbia looks at bottled water, 250,000 nanoplastics per liter, 250,000. Now, the same could probably be said of these coffee cups. When you pour boiling water into them, I'm thinking 500,000 to 1 million micro and nanoplastics per liter. There was also a study done at Columbia looking at a can of Coca-Cola. I don't think people realize this. Cans are lined with plastic invariably. Soup cans, soda cans, energy drink cans, beer cans. A can of Coca-Cola had 3.7 million nanoplastics. And this possibly is because it's an acidic drink, because it has the sulfuric acid and these acids and the benzoic acid in the Coca-Cola. But an acidic drink in a plastic container is probably even more microplastics. So I think we need more research, because you look at what people are drinking out of, and it's all cans now, or plastic bottles, or soup cans. Soup cans are filled hot. So that's essentially the equivalent of a coffee cup lined with plastic. And so if you're just thinking about, okay, don't store your food in plastic, don't cook in plastic, don't reheat your food in plastic, but when you're drinking water or other beverages, do your best to use glass or stainless steel. Nobody's going to be perfect, but that's the first step, is really just understanding the total load that humans are exposed to. And I think that's the biggest lack that we have in our knowledge gap right now, is that I don't think we understand how much of these we're exposed to. And then I think once you do that, yes, the body has mechanisms. We will detox, whether this is through the poop or the pee. Your body will figure it out as best as possible. Just stop intaking them. There's some evidence that certain probiotics, maybe some fermented foods, can help with their breakdown in the gut. But I think the best advice is just make sure that you have regular bowel movements, hopefully every day. Eating healthy foods will help with that, and then limit your intake. And that's probably the best you can do beyond really extreme metrics or methods, which are probably not something people need to know about. There are some blood cleaning procedures that might be useful, but they're just not accessible to most people today.
Mm-hmm. Mark, what about supplements? I know you like creatine, which is like, everybody's talking about creatine now. Is that just for guys? Is that for men and women? And what exactly is that going to do for us?
Creatine is probably the most benign supplement you can take. I built a career manufacturing supplements for 30 years. Before Primal Kitchen and the foods, I was a supplement manufacturer. So I've been in the business for a long time. I don't take that many supplements anymore. I just realized that, again, back to this concept of minimum effective dose of whatever it is in my life, minimum effective dose of exercise, minimum effective dose of food, and now minimum effective dose of supplements. So I take collagen because it's sort of a nose to tail concept that Paul talks about, and I take creatine, but I take it, I cycle it on and off, because I think the body gets used to creatine over time, and the benefits for men largely are in terms of muscle building. If you're doing a lot of training in the gym, creatine sort of gives you that ability to do 12 repetitions of something you could only do 10 of yesterday. And in that regard, it's allowing you to do more work, which then prompts the genes to upregulate to build more muscle. Creatine is a cell volumizer, which just makes the muscles look bigger. So there's for guys, that's sort of the reason that guys use creatine. Women are now using creatine, and now there's a lot of studies that show that maybe creatine is assisting with brain chemistry and brain health. So there's a good reason to do that. I think again, I'm seeing sort of a pendulum swinging way out to one side, where if 5 grams of creatine was great, then 15 must be amazing and 20 must be even better.
Yeah.
I think that's probably inaccurate. I think you can overdo creatine, and it can have an effect on kidney function, for instance, if you do too much of it. So
yeah, there's some lady all over my Twitter right now on like everybody's podcast saying I should be taking 20 grams of creatine and that'll make me super focused if I have a podcast to do. I'm like, well, I've never taken creatine ever. Yeah. And then I'm looking at like the side effects. It says bloating, which you can get off of 5 grams, never mind 20. Like, okay, so I'm going to be super sharp, but I'm going to look like I'm 8 months pregnant.
Well, that's the cell volumizer. That it causes cells to retain water. So in the muscle, that's a good thing, but throughout the body, especially if you're taking in 20 grams. I mean, as a guy, the most I've ever taken is probably 12 grams on a regular basis. So 20 for a small woman would be, I don't understand the science behind it at all. So like any of these things, it's having its moment. By the way, creatine's been around for 40 years. It was big in the 80s and 90s, and then it sort of disappeared, and now it's having its moment again. And you see this with a lot of the supplements. N-acetylcysteine, phosphatidylserine, resveratrol, they come and go over years. But in the case of creatine, I just think it's benign if you take it in the right amounts. I wouldn't overdo it. I certainly wouldn't take 20 grams a day.
Okay, Paul, what do you think about supplements? And also, our pal Britt Mayer writes in wanting to know your thoughts on peptides and also nicotine.
Okay.
Nicotine. So what are your thoughts on supplements, peptides, and nicotine?
Okay. I just want to say something about creatine too. Maybe for you specifically, Megyn, but I know that a lot of women have this concern of bloating with creatine. And this is very interesting. So creatine monohydrate, which is probably by far the best research form of creatine that humans can take, is not very soluble in water at room temperature. And so dry scooping creatine is a very bad idea because it is a cell volumizer and it holds onto water. If you dry scoop creatine or you're drinking a creatine drink, and even 5 grams of creatine is not going to be soluble in less than maybe 18 to 24 ounces of water, you're going to get undissolved creatine in your gut. That's going to pull in water from the gut cells, and that's going to give you bloating and potentially even other unpleasant GI things. So if you get bloating with lower doses of creatine, you just want to drink it with more water or drink it with slightly warmed water where it will be more soluble. So creatine that's dissolved in water fully is going to be much less likely to cause bloating when men or women take it. But I think about this specifically because my girlfriend wanted to take creatine, but she said it always caused bloating, and doing this, adding more water, was really helpful for her. So that's important because I think creatine can be helpful for people, but a lot of men and women run into this bloating issue, and it's just the form factor by which they're taking it.
So for women, I mean, because most women don't want to build up their muscle bulk, but you're saying it could help with possibly brain fog.
It can, I think creatine is a valuable thing. It occurs in meat. It occurs especially in red meat. It's one of the things that's been found to be valuable in red meat.
You really hurt your shoulder, your rotator cuff, and it kind of changed the way you thought the remainder of your life would go.
It really did. I want to first say, though, that my desire to do this started much younger. When I was 19 years old, I started when I was 17 at what I'm doing. So I've been doing it for 45 years. And I was obsessed with helping people. And I worked extremely hard. And I had a lot of grace in my life. So I got access to some amazing athletes and I got great results and some CEOs. And then at 19, Megyn, I found myself at a place, that part of your brain that's kind of the fight or flight part, the kind of survival part. I didn't know how to manage that. I had a tough childhood. And so my brain suddenly started to say, well, maybe I'm in this position at this young age because I'm going to die young. I'm successful now because I'm going to die young. And even though intellectually I know that was insane, I even started having dreams about it, obsessing about it. And I thought it would be cancer, not some easy thing like hit by a car, welted away from cancer. And the reason I tell you this is because it was a huge part in what made me later on be able to deal with the injuries I had, because I'm obsessing on it. And of course, you obsess on something, it shows up in your life usually. Unfortunately, the first time it happened was not a tumor with me. It was my girlfriend, and it was her mom. And she came home and said, they've sent her home to die. She's going to die in 9 weeks. And if it had been me, Megyn, I think, I think most of us will do more for others we love than we'll do for ourselves. If it had been me, I probably have gone into fear. But instead, it's like, wait a second, there are thousands of people that have been in stage 4 cancer and turned it around and are alive today. let's go study those patterns. That's what I've done my whole life, right? So I'd taken a speed reading course. I started reading all these books, and I found this book called One Answer to Cancer. Wouldn't be the one I recommend today because there's much better tools, but it was written by this dentist who had pancreatic cancer, the most deadly cancer of all. And 12 years later, he was alive, and he explained what he did. So I went to this woman, her name was Jenny, in her early 40s. And I said, Jenny, I said, I think you can still live. This man lived. There are a lot of people. Why don't you read this and see if it's worth going for? I mean, you have no downside. If it doesn't work, you're just going to have the same outcome. And long story short, she applied it, and she had a tumor on the back of her shoulder that was protruding, and she had one in her feminine organs. And within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, she started having more energy and feeling better. In about 10 weeks, you couldn't see the tumor anymore. You couldn't feel it even. And so finally, when she outlived the time they thought she'd die, they did exploratory surgery, and they found the end of my pinky's fingernail was all that was left of it. And the doctor said, this is just an absolute miracle. And she said, it is, but let me tell you what I did. And he's like, no, it's just a miracle. She's, by the way, in her 80s today, totally alive. And that changed me from victim and fear to really being kind of a biohacker and transforming my life. And so, I do events for 4 days, 7 days with 12, 15, 20,000 people in a stadium, and I hold them 12, 14 hours a day when they wouldn't sit for a 3-hour movie. So what I do with my body is insane. But what happened to me later is I got a tumor. I'm a helicopter pilot as well. And I went for, a normal physical to stay qualified. You do it every 2 years. And the doc there did some blood tests. And so he kept calling, and I was going to south of France. And I said, well, just tell him to send the report. And I come home one night, there's a note that says, call the doctor. He says it's an emergency.
Oh, no.
And then, my old fear just went crazy. The mind goes nuts. I've been so healthy for all this time, but I do fly. Is it too much radiation? You know what the mind does. Mm-hmm. And then I've learned to settle myself and say, like a coward dies 1,000 deaths, a courageous person once. Let me wake up in the morning and find out. Sure enough, doc tells me, you got a tumor in your brain. I'm like, what? I came to you. There was nothing wrong with me. He says, well, I noticed you have a lot of growth hormone. I said, well, how'd you figure that out? My hands are bigger than your head and my feet are size 16. I grew 10 inches in a year. I was 5'1" in high school. I'm 6'7" now. And he said, well, all I want to tell you is you have a pituitary tumor. You need to come in immediately for surgery. And when I asked the prognosis, he said, well, I have to tell you honestly, you can die. It's not an easy surgery, but you're not likely to. But your, hormonal system will not be the same, and you probably have a lot less energy. And I was like, well, I'd love to get a second opinion. I'd seen the Mayo Clinic studies, saying everyone should get one. And so long story shortened, I went off trying to forget about this. And of course, the mind didn't let you do that. Came and did it, found out I had the tumor, and then decided to try a different approach, a biochemical approach. And I saw this top doctor in Boston, and he said, don't do the surgery. That's crazy. He said, you go to Switzerland twice a year, take this injection. I have something called gigantism. And he said, your heart valves won't get too big and you won't die. And I said, but my heart valves are normal. And he said, yes, they are. And I said, well, then why would I do this right now if I've had this for 10 years and I'm normal? He said, well, just to be certain. And I said, well, there's a price to certainty, right? What if the drug has side effects? And which, by the way, this man was the sweetest man. He goes, the baker wants to bake, the surgeon wants to cut. I want to drug you. He said, but you're right. You do have that option. So I went to 6 other doctors. The last one said to me, Tony, you recover from basically 2 marathons in a weekend like no one I've ever seen. And he said, I know bodybuilders that pay $1,200 a month to get the growth hormone you have. So that was when I'm 32. I'm now 52 or 62, I should say. And in 30 years, I've monitored and I don't have a problem. So these things affected my psychology. So when I finally had this piece you described, being an idiot going down the side of a mountain with chasing a 22-year-old professional snowboarder and discovering I didn't have that ability, the wreck was pretty bad. I thought I broke my neck. It was so painful, but I
Okay, but just for the record, not as dumb as roller derby, but go ahead.
Were you doing a story, Megyn? Is that how you do
Yes, I do have that as an excuse.
Well, I was going to say, I can't imagine you just doing it for fun. But I was doing it for fun, so I would still say idiotic. But the bottom line is I've lived with pain 0 to 10. It was a 9, Megyn. I mean, I couldn't sleep. The nerve pain was so bad. So you go to your doctors, and I went to 4, surgery. And I always ask, what's the prognosis? Well, you may not be able to lift your arm above your shoulder. It could tear again. And how long does it take to rehab? 4 to 6 months. So I'm like, picture me with one arm trying to do a seminar for 12 hours a day. So I asked about stem cells because, as you know, I've worked with some of the greatest of all time in a variety of sports, great GOAT athletes. And some of them, like Cristiano Ronaldo, he's supposed to have 3 months of recovery. It was 2.5 weeks with stem cells. But all the docs said, no, they don't work. They won't make this happen. So I went to Dr. Peter Diamandis, who's a good friend of mine, rocket scientist and an MD from Harvard, and said, everybody, who should I talk to? And he said, Dr. Bob Harari, who's now a partner and a co-author in this book, he's one of the people that discovered stem cells. He said, Tony, at your age, your stem cells drop off the cliff. I was 53 at the time. He said, you need the force of life. You need to get stem cells that are brand new, like 4 days old. And I said, well, I don't want to do fetal tissue. He goes, well, we never do that. But when we have babies, you know, the placenta and the cord come out and most people throw them away. And we discovered it has the healing power like nothing else. So I went for 3 days of treatment. I had just an IV 20 minutes a day, a single injection. And I left out the most important part. The fourth doctor I talked to, after telling me about this problem with my shoulder, turned to me and said, literally looked at me in the face and said, now I need to be your doctor. I need to tell you life as you know it is over. I said, what? And he said, let me show you your spine. No more jumping, no more running, certainly no more snowboarding. He said, one hit and you could lose the ability to walk. And I was used to a lot of pain, but I wasn't used to that level. I came out of that and said, I got to find the solution. I went down, did the stem cells. On day 2, I woke up not only with no problem with my shoulder, I had the MRI, my shoulder's perfect, no surgery, perfect shoulder. But the second thing that happened was I had no pain in my spine, Megyn, for the first time in 14 years. So I became obsessed. I want to know everything about stem cells. And then I discovered it's not just stem cells. It's this regeneration revolution. And believe it or not, the Pope, and I'll finish with this, the Pope does every 2 years the biggest regenerative conference in the world because he sees this as a gift to humanity. And he brings all these doctors together. And they asked me to be the cleanup speaker. And I said, I'm happy to do that, but I want to go to the whole program with all the other docs. And I did. And I met some of the most genius scientists in the world. I met people, at least 24 people that were sent home to die, you know, because their cancers were untreatable. But they met Dr. June with CAR T cells, or they met a new approach, and they're alive 10 years later. I met Jack Nicklaus, who's, you know, the greatest golfer of all time. He was told he was in so much pain, he couldn't stand for 10 minutes, literally without the pain being unbearable. Here's a guy his whole life, athletic, playing golf, and missed all that. They were going to fuse his spine, which only works about half the time. Thank God he didn't do that. He did stem cells, and he's now 82 years old playing golf and playing tennis again. So that gave me the drive to say, I'm going to interview these 150 doctors. I want to bring those answers to people. And I have this healing in my own body as a secondary gift as well.
Oh, now, wait a minute, because, you know, when you give birth to a baby, they give you the option of sending all that off to be stored just in case your kid needs some life-saving thing, which I did. But would I need to use that, or I can just get stem cells from, you know, any doctor? Does it have to be something that came from me?
No, it doesn't. That's called autologous. That's the legal term for what comes from you. And at this stage of life, that probably, unless you have like a small change, like an elbow or maybe a little bit to a knee, but for something greater, you need what's called allogenic. It's just a fancy word from cells from someone else. But it's still valuable. You know, I met an 11-year-old child who was supposed to die when he was 4, and they used his sister's stem cells because they forgot to or didn't believe in, you know, saving the cord. And Dr. Bob Harari, by the way, was the first person who ever did that. He's the one who created the original companies that do that. I did that. I just now have a 10-month-old daughter. I have a 48-year-old and a 10-year-old. I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids. But I saved it for the same reason. But today, they can take even skin cells and turn them into something called pluripotent, which means cells that can become anything else in your body, any organ. So there are a lot more choices, but I still recommend for parents to save that because the match is so precise. It's still incredibly valuable.
I read your 8 tips, like the general, we can go through them, but like they make a lot of sense. You know, the sleep, make sure it's regular, make sure it's regimented, lower the temperature to 68 degrees. I got that. Like, that's a good one. Walk. Eat whole foods, only stuff your great grandmother would eat. I love all that. But like, what is there something special in the formula that takes you from on the CPAP machine and all these drugs to like Dana White? I feel like I'm in my 20s.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what's on that. So, I mean, we need to start with the basics, right? I mean, we know this from Blue Zone studies. We know this from the big data that if you don't master your sleep, if you don't eat a whole food diet, which is a diet absent of processed food. And if you don't make exercise non-negotiable, basically nothing else matters. We can't really sleep our way around a poor diet, and we can't exercise our way around not sleeping. And again, we know this from big data, from Blue Zone studies. There's no continuity between diets. Now, meaning, if you look at the areas of the world where people are living the longest, healthiest, happiest lives, it's not because of the carnivore diet or the keto diet or paleo or pescatarian or vegan or vegetarian. It's because they are eating no processed food. And all of us can do that. All of us can switch to a whole food diet. The other non-negotiable is bringing your attention to your sleep. A few years ago, I actually decided that I would schedule all of my meetings and travel around sleep and exercise. And I can't tell you what a demonstrative change in my life that made. So that's one of the things that I incorporate into clients of mine into their schedule. I really try to fix their sleep. And then finally, making mobility non-negotiable. We know that sitting is the new smoking. I mean, sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. And this is entirely fixable. And so if you were to draw your attention to three things, I would say whole food diet, master your sleep, and make mobility non-negotiable. And a lot of people don't focus on those three things, and then they want the magic pill. Is it NAD IVs? Is it nicotinamide riboside? Is it ashwagandha, St. John's wort, CoQ10? Is it any of these magic supplements? And it's not. It's those three basics. And then after that, I truly believe that if you really want to embark on a sincere health journey, you need to supplement for deficiency, not the sake of supplementing. The worst thing you can do is get on Google and start Googling around about what is a good supplement. And this is where most people get lost, because you can make an argument for just about anything. So the question is, what does your body need? And we believe this in plant physiology. So if you were to take a leaf, let's say, that was rotting in a palm tree, and you called a true arborist, like a true botanist, out to look at that leaf, they wouldn't even touch the leaf. They would core test the soil. And they would say, you know what, Megyn, there's no nitrogen in this soil. And they would add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf would heal. Well, human beings are no different. When you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, and by raw materials, I'm talking about vitamins, minerals, amino acids, basic nutrients, you get the expression of disease. There's so many of your listeners right now that go to bed tired, but as their environment quiets, their mind wakes up. And they start to ruminate. So they lay there in bed and their mind awake, but their body tired, and they ruminate on things for minutes or hours, and it robs them of deep sleep. And this is very easy to fix. The same thing with, nagging issues like attention deficit disorders, which is not really an attention deficit at all. It's an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows opening in our mind at the same time. And most of us think that we need to fix this by adding amphetamines to our system to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind, things like 5-ANs, Ritalin, Adderall. But the truth is we can supplement to quiet the mind. There are gut issues. The vast majority of my clients would have gut issues, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping, bloating, and they couldn't relate it to what they had last eaten because they overlooked the pace of the gut. They look at food allergies and food sensitivities, but they don't know that certain nutrient deficiencies, so for example, a deficiency in something called methylfolate, which is very easy to get over the counter, it's a really inexpensive supplement, can fix gut motility issues, and they can restore the pace of their gut to normal. So now they don't eat the same thing on Monday and they're fine, and they eat the exact same thing on Wednesday and then end up blowing up like a tick. And so very often what happens in the human body is we deprive it of certain raw materials. Vitamin D3 is probably the most clinically deficient nutrient in the vast majority of human beings. And if you look at what happens when you just deprive the body of vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, the only vitamin, by the way, that human beings can make on our own, you don't need to eat, you don't need to supplement, you don't need to drink. All you need to do is expose your skin to sunlight. Your body will make it with the cholesterol in your bloodstream. This nutrient is so important for human function that when it's deficient, we get the expression of disease. If you look at the data on COVID, for example, the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID was a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3, not immunosuppressants, not obesity, not type 2 diabetes. It was a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3. And so very often what I'll do is I'll have clients of mine once in their lifetime do a test called a genetic methylation test. What this test does, it's a cheek swab. You swab your cheek, send it into a lab, and what this test will tell you is what nutrients, what raw material can your body convert into the usable form, and what can it not? And you supplement for that deficiency. If you want to see magic really happen in human beings, you give their body the raw material it needs to do its job. That's the simple truth.
Now, where can you get one of these tests? Only from Gary Brecka? Or
No,
do you
there
get it
are
online?
lots of places that do.
Who will analyze it for you?
Yeah, there are lots of places that do genetic methylation tests. I mean, I have a genetic methylation test, but I'm not here to sell my test. You want to get a genetic methylation test. The reason why I say methylation is because if you get a full genome sequence, you're going to get paralysis of analysis. You're going to see that you have olive skin and green eyes and detached earlobes, and you can see the distance on your index fingers, and none of that matters, not in terms of what you supplement with. But genes of methylation are genes that take raw materials and convert them into the usable form. So for example, we pull crude oil out of the ground, but you can't put crude oil into your gas tank. And the reason why you can't is because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. But if you take crude oil and you refine it into gasoline, now the car can run. Well, human beings are no different. We take vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, nutrients of all kind. We put them into the body, and then the body converts these into the form it can use. If you can't make this conversion, you have a deficiency. And it is this deficiency that leads to the expression of these diseases. You know, the human genome is specifically designed to not pass on disease. But if you went to your doctor and you had high blood pressure and they did all kinds of cardiac exams, you know, they did an EKG and an EEG and a dye contrast study and a cardiac catheterization and heart sounds and lung sounds, and they couldn't find anything wrong with your heart. The next thing they'll do is they'll look at your family history and they'll say, oh my gosh, Megyn, your mom's brother and your dad's brother both had high blood pressure. You have familial hypertension or genetically inherited hypertension. And you go, oh, I guess I just lost the genetic lottery. So now I need to, medication for the rest of my life. And that's patently false. You know, there aren't genes for a lot of these conditions. So they're not passed on the genome. They run in families, but they are not genetic. What we pass from generation to generation very often is not disease. We pass the inability for the body to refine a raw material, which causes a deficiency, which leads to that disease. So very specifically in Dana White's case, he had an impaired ability at a gene mutation called MTHFR. I won't tell you what the nickname is for that gene.
Right. Got it.
It stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, just so you know. Not what it looks like. But this gene mutation, 46% of the population has it. So 46% of your listeners have it right now. And what this gene mutation does is it impairs the ability for the body, or blocks the ability for the body to convert folic acid into the form the body can use, called folinic acid or methylfolate. And that doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. We spray it on all of our grains, grains, pasta, flour, rice, cereals are all sprayed with this chemical called folic acid. And I say chemical because we make it in a laboratory. Most people think that folic acid occurs naturally in nature. It doesn't. You can't find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. We make it in a laboratory. Folate occurs naturally in nature, but we fortify or enrich foods. So if you see a label on a food package that says fortified or enriched, that means it's been sprayed with the chemical folic acid. Well, 46% of the population can't break this compound down. And if you can't break this compound down, it rises. And if you can't convert it into the usable form, methylfolate, you have a deficiency. So what are the consequences of that deficiency? Well, the first consequence is impaired gut motility. You get gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping, and you start down the road of food allergy testing, food sensitivity testing, gut microbiome testing, and nothing works because you haven't addressed the pace of the gut.
They don't test for safety first. They wait until there's a large body of pushback, and then they use things called plausible deniability, where if they don't test their products, then they don't actually know they're harmful. And so then using all these loopholes of fragrances and flavorings and all of this stuff, it's just ridiculous. And so I'm not here to go, oh my God, that's so, yeah, there's these are shitty regulations. These shouldn't be this way. But again, like, I don't want to spend time. I'm staring at it. I get pissed off for a second, but I want to spend time with the mamas of the world to wake up and go, hey, there's things that you can help the whole family. You can help your whole community. You can help your pet. You can help your child. You can help your husband. You can help yourself. And these things are added up over time. They are causing all kinds of problems that, you're going to your doctor, they want to give you more medication. They don't even know what the hell is going on. But when we clean up this chemical frickin' romance that we have going on. You clean up your house being your body first, your house second, your family. Then we have a revolution of health. Because, you know, I use this example where if you want to see the power of nature, which is us, look at Chernobyl. You know, that's us at the extreme, right? There's a meltdown. No one can ever live there again. But if you go back there and if you see the film and the footage, guess what nature did? Nature said, I don't care if the soil's contaminated, and it blasted through. So wildlife came back and plants are growing. It's like in the face of that toxicology, right? So that's what I believe. I believe that more powerfully than anything else, that if we get the hell out of the way, if we get this shit out of the way, and we allow ourselves to let life flourish, we are so freaking unstoppable and powerful. That's what I want for people. That's the other side of super life. Get rid of this shit so that your body can freaking thrive, because it knows how to do it. But if we're constantly being thwarted by these subtle and persistent cumulative burdens, then how the hell are we supposed to have the life that we truly want? We're dragging around a chemistry set of all of this chemical exposure. It's like, no way, man. Not anymore.
It feels so overwhelming. You know, it feels like, what if so I switched the moisturizing lotion and the shaving cream and the shampoo, and I try to grow a garden and eat from it, or buy organic, avoid the dirty dozen. We can talk about that. You like frozen fruits somewhat more. Then I sit down in my chair, which has been sprayed for, to be fire retardant. And then I go over and I walk on my carpet, which has been sprayed to be dog pee repellent. And, and then I just breathe the air, which is sending over plastics from Germany. Or I just read that new car smell that everybody loves, that those are chemicals you're inhaling. So it's like, right. Oh my God, why am I worried about the damn coconut oil in my body? There's no getting out of this.
Right. Yeah, but it's everything, Megan. It's everything. So it's like, I think of this as like, look at relationships that work and that don't work. If you don't face your problems with each other, then your relationship's screwed, right? You have to face these honestly. I wish I didn't have to write this book. I wish my dad didn't suffer from this. I wish people with electrosensitivity aren't suffering as a result of smartifying everything. I wish it didn't exist, but it does exist. So what are we going to sit back and be a victim? Or are we going to make these consistent changes? And again, your change, I'm inspired by you, because by you taking that coconut oil, you've just now eliminated the largest organ in your body, for your body. Now you're not chemicalizing it with phthalates and parabens and fragrances that are undercutting your health. That is massive, massive. And then the snowball happens. When you become an advocate for yourself, then you're unstoppable. And then you just make the next choice. Like, oh, wow, Darren's not saying don't use perfume. Just don't use their perfume. Use rose oil, a hydrosol of lavender, flower essences, which will not only help you parasympathetically, help your stress response during the day, it actually will help the other people around you, as opposed to abusing you, right? And abusing other people around you with these fragrances that are created in the lab.
We're all worried about our metabolism and would love it to be a little faster. Everybody I know, especially people who are now like me in their 50s, and you can feel it slow down. For sure, I can feel it slow down. I'm not allowed to eat as much, but I still want to. It's so hard. I'm still so hungry all the time, but I know it's slowed because the same amount of intake every day produces weight gain where it didn't before. So it's just sad. It's just sad, Kate.
Well, let me tell you something that is actually good news. Is it is kind of, there's a lot of myths around weight loss and metabolism, and it is actually a myth that your metabolism even has speeds. And what you expressed is exactly what made people think, just assume that their metabolism has speeds, is because it feels like it's harder to lose weight and it's become easier to gain. But it has to do with your ability to burn your body fat, which is something related to metabolic flexibility, which is something that I'm sure Mark can speak to that as well. Just it means that you need to be able to burn your body fat easily between meals, because if you're hungry, between meals, if you get hungry between meals and you feel like you need to snack, that is a red flag. It's a red flag that you're not burning your body fat, because if you want to lose weight, then going between meals should be your best friend. You should be burning your body fat, but most people are not. And they're not because their metabolism is damaged by this stuff in our diet that we're all eating in massive quantities called seed oils that nobody has told you are bad for you.
I'm so into the seed oil discussion. We are 100% spending a bunch of time on that because I feel like, okay, elimination of just the choice of a certain food, that's easy, right? You don't have to get rid of all oils, but there's certain oils we're eating that we shouldn't be. But let me ask you about that, Mark, because when I looked at the Mark diet, one thing I did notice was there are no snacks on there. So to Kate's point, is that hard? Because I will say for me, and I think it's probably because I'm not eating the right stuff, it is very hard for me not to snack between lunch and dinner. And like you, I'm an intermittent faster. I know you don't eat before noon or 12:30. So breakfast isn't really on the menu for me most days, although some days I have it. Anyway, snacking's really hard for me to avoid. So how are you don't have that problem? You go right from lunch to dinner without having hunger?
Yes, I do that. And, to fill in a little bit of what Kate said, this concept of metabolic flexibility really is the holy grail of not just weight loss, but health. If you can develop metabolic flexibility, if you can train your body through choices of food that you eat and types of exercise that you choose to do. If you can train your body to become metabolically flexible, you can train it to derive energy from whatever substrate happens to be available. So if you eat a meal and there's carbohydrate in that, you can burn the carbohydrates as glucose or as glycogen in your muscles. You can burn the fat in that meal, or you can burn the stored body fat when you choose not to eat. So metabolic flexibility is when you achieve kind of that state, you are now able to go longer periods of time without eating, which includes not needing to snack. So you mentioned intermittent fasting. I call it a compressed eating window. Some people call it intermittent eating, but it's basically this idea that when you're metabolically flexible, when you're burning fat, when you're deriving energy from your own body fat stores, and that's magical because then you're burning off your body fat, you're literally using it as fuel, which is what it was intended to do, then the biggest issue of all starts to dissipate, and that is hunger, appetite, and cravings. Once your body knows that it can get energy from stored body fat and not have to rely on a fresh supply of calories every 2 or 3 hours, your body seamlessly goes into this mode of burning stored body fat without a shift in blood sugar, without getting hangry, without a mood swings or any of the other sort of symptoms that people complain about when they skip a meal. So it's now what we're getting into is, okay, how do we arrive at this metabolically flexible body?
Yes. How do we teach our bodies this very important skill?
Of course, but it's like good news, bad news, right? The good news is, well, I'll start with the bad. The bad news is you got to do the work, right? You're going to have to eliminate certain foods. You're going to have to orchestrate a way of eating that may be different from what you're used to. The good news is it's very easy if you know the right tools, if you have the right strategy. It's easy. It's delicious. I mean, you don't have to really sacrifice taste or flavor for any of this. And over time, what happens is because you're eating now more nutrient dense foods, as opposed to the highly caloric dense foods without nutrition that most people in this country are consuming, the body then says, I've got all the macronutrients I need. I've got all the fat, protein, and carbohydrate. I've got all the micronutrition I need. I don't need to eat every couple of hours. And so the first thing that really I find disappears is this need to snack between meals. And that's kind of step one of this notion that in order to get rid of our stored body fat, in order to lose weight, which is what most people will describe it as, we need to burn off the body fat that we've stored over the years as a result of eating too much food, simply eating too much food.
How as a practical matter, how do you train your body to eat the fat that's on your body as opposed to whatever fuel you've put in your body? Because if you eat, let's say, breakfast or you eat lunch, that food takes a while to digest. That energy is in your body. So isn't your body necessarily going to eat that fuel first, those carbs, those proteins, those fats, before it goes to your body fat? Like, I always wonder, how do I make it get to the body fat and get past the food that I had to put in there, Mark?
Well, you have to withhold some of those energy substrates. You have to decide either not to eat, like to skip a meal once in a while, to fast, or there's a diet based around the ketogenic principle. So and I've written a couple of books on the keto diet, which is a way of training your body to become what we call fat adapted. So once you withhold carbohydrate, and now you're telling your body, hey, you're not going to be getting all of the glucose that we've been feeding you every 2 or 3 hours for the last 20 or 30 or 50 years. Now we're going to have to go into plan B, which everybody has this blueprint in their body. Everybody has the ability to build the metabolic machinery to be better at burning fat. We just never give it the opportunity. So that's part of that work that I'm talking about. There are no real hacks around this. You will have to, in order to develop metabolic flexibility, you will have to selectively remove certain things from your diet. It may be, and I think most of us know, removing sugars is probably appropriate for just about everybody. We eat way too much sugar. I would say removing starchy, processed carbohydrates, mostly processed grains, pies, cakes, cookies, crackers, cereals, things like that. Remove them. And as Kate alluded earlier, you come down to a list of very healthy and natural foods: meat, fish, fowl, eggs, nuts, seeds, vegetables, some fruit, some starchy tubers. And over time, when the brain gets the notion that you're not going to be delivering it fresh glucose every 2 or 3 hours, breakfast, a snack, lunch, a snack, dinner, and a midnight snack, the body has all of these amazing genetic switches that it turns on that says, okay, we're going to get ready to burn more fat. We never had to before now, but now we're going to get ready to burn more of the stored body fat and call upon those reserves, those energy reserves that we've been building up for years, and burn those instead of the plate on the food. So when you say, how do you train your body to burn the fat as opposed to the breakfast? I say, don't eat the breakfast. If you wake up in the morning and you're not hungry, there's no reason to eat breakfast. Breakfast is, it's been sold as the most important meal of the day. It's not. And most of the people who get into this idea of metabolic flexibility or a compressed eating window will say, if I wake up with all the energy I need, why would I need to eat? This is an opportunity for my body to get 500 calories from body fat between now and the first meal I have at maybe lunch or 1 o'clock.